Good evening, Lions Nation. I hope you're all doing well. Tonight we have an update that may not be generating the biggest headlines around the NFL, but in my opinion, it could end up being one of the smartest decisions the Detroit Lions have made this offseason. Sometimes the most important roster moves aren't the ones everyone talks about. They're the ones that quietly create opportunities for players who have been waiting for the right moment to prove they belong. That's exactly why I think this latest development involving Amon-Ra St deserves much more attention. Since arriving in Detroit, he's earned the respect of fans through his incredible journey, relentless work ethic, and the energy he brings every day. But despite all the excitement surrounding him, there was one major question that remained unanswered. Could he actually produce when given a real opportunity? Now, the Lions appear ready to answer that question. The latest update from the organization gives Hassanein a genuine opportunity to compete and show what he's capable of. And in my view, this could completely change the conversation about his chances of making the 53-man roster. He still has to earn his place on the field, but for the first time since joining Detroit, he'll have a realistic chance to prove that the hype surrounding him is backed by his performance. We'll break down exactly what changed, why the coaching staff made this decision, and what it could mean not only for Amon-Ra St, but for the Lions' defensive depth heading into the new season. According to defensive line coach Casey Rogers, the Lions are officially transitioning Amon-Ra St from the rush end role into the big end position. At first glance, that might sound like a small adjustment, but in reality, it completely changes both his responsibilities and, perhaps more importantly, his opportunity to contribute. As a rush end, the primary objective is simple: attack the quarterback. Players in that role are expected to win with speed, explode around the edge, and create pressure on passing downs. Their job is centered almost entirely around generating sacks and disrupting the pocket. However, the big end position asks for something very different. Instead of simply chasing quarterbacks, the player is expected to control the edge against the running game, occupy offensive linemen, create favorable matchups for teammates, and bring physicality to every snap. It is a role built around discipline and strength just as much as athletic ability. When you start looking at Amon-Ra St's physical profile, this move begins to make a lot of sense. He reportedly spent the entire offseason transforming his body. He explained that he lost a significant amount of body fat while becoming stronger at the same time. His goal wasn't simply to look different, it was to prepare himself for the role that the coaching staff believes gives him the best chance to succeed. The coaching staff also recognizes something important. Hassanein may not possess the elite burst required to consistently beat offensive tackles as a traditional pass rushing specialist, but if he lines up as a big end, suddenly his athleticism becomes a major advantage compared to other players who normally fill that position. Instead of trying to become something he isn't, the Lions appear to be putting him in a role that better matches his strengths. We've already seen this type of alignment used within Detroit's defense before. Players have shifted outside to help defend the run depending on game situations, and this position has often been occupied by bigger, more physical defenders capable of controlling the edge rather than simply flying into the backfield. Typically, those players weigh somewhere around the 280 to 290 pound range, so it will be interesting to see exactly how much physical development Hassanein has made since last season after spending much of his previous campaign in the 260 pound range. What makes this move even more interesting is what it means for his chances of actually making the roster. If Hassanein remained strictly at rush end, he would be competing against some of the toughest competition anywhere on the team. That group includes Aiden Hutchinson, second round rookie Derek Moore, and veteran DJ Wonnum. Breaking into that rotation would be incredibly difficult for almost any young player. Moving to big end creates a much different competition. Instead of battling the deepest part of the defensive line, he now finds himself competing against players occupying a position with fewer established stars. That alone could dramatically improve his chances of earning meaningful snaps once training camp begins. The Lions clearly aren't giving him this opportunity simply because they like his story. They believe this position better fits his skill set. Sometimes the smartest roster decisions aren't about adding new players through free agency or the draft. Sometimes they're about maximizing the talent that is already inside the building. Still, there is another side to this conversation that has created plenty of debate among Lions fans. Amon-Ra St has never hidden how much he loves football or how badly he wants to play in Detroit. He constantly speaks about his work ethic, his dedication, and his willingness to do whatever the team asks of him. That passion has made him an easy player for fans fans to root for. At the same time, there is an important reality in the NFL. Energy alone doesn't guarantee a roster spot. Excitement alone doesn't earn playing time. Coaches don't make final decisions based on interviews or motivational speeches. They make them based on production once the pads come on. Some observers have even pointed out that Hassanein frequently talks about the work he puts into improving himself. While confidence certainly isn't a bad thing, training camp will ultimately determine whether those offseason improvements translate into real football performance. The Lions coaching staff already knows he's passionate. They already know he's motivated. Now they need to see those improvements show up every day against NFL competition. That is why this position change could become one of the most fascinating stories to follow throughout training camp. Instead of asking whether Ahmed Hassanein belongs on the roster, the conversation may soon become whether this new role allows him to carve out a legitimate place in Detroit's defensive rotation. If he truly has transformed his body, embraced the responsibilities of playing big end, and proves he can consistently set the edge against the run while bringing enough athleticism to create disruption, this move could end up looking like a very smart piece of coaching by the Lions. But training camp always has a way of separating offseason optimism from on-field reality, and now all eyes will be on Ahmed Hassanein to see whether this new opportunity becomes the breakthrough everyone has been waiting for. Do you believe this position change gives Ahmed Hassanein a real chance to earn meaningful playing time for the Lions this season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That competition isn't limited to the defensive line either. As training camp approaches, several position battles are beginning to take shape across the roster, and they could end up having a major impact on what the Lions look like when Week 1 finally arrives. One of the biggest questions centers around right tackle. The competition between Larry Borom and first-round pick Blake Miller is going to receive plenty of attention, but when you look at the investment the organization made, it's difficult not to believe they already have enormous confidence in their rookie. Blake Miller wasn't simply drafted with the 17th overall pick. Reports indicate the Lions actually attempted to trade up to select him even earlier. That tells you everything you need to know about how highly this front office values him. Organizations don't aggressively pursue players in the first round unless they fully believe those players can become immediate contributors. That is why many fans expect Miller to win the starting job sooner rather than later. Yes, Larry Borom brings experience, but Miller enters the league after 4 seasons as a full-time starter in college. The amount of football he has already played gives him a level of preparation that many rookies simply don't possess. The preseason will become extremely important because everyone will finally get to see how natural Miller looks against NFL competition. Fans remember watching young offensive linemen make their first appearances in preseason games and immediately recognizing whether they looked comfortable or overwhelmed. That same evaluation will happen with Miller. Every snap will be analyzed, every pass set examined, and every run block scrutinized because expectations surrounding him are already incredibly high. The offensive line features another fascinating battle at left guard. Christian Mahogany, Ben Bartch, and Miles Frazier are all expected to compete, and that competition remains much more open than many people expected heading into camp. Christian Mahogany appears to have the inside track. He already understands the system, possesses impressive athletic upside, and could eventually develop into a long-term starter if everything comes together. Ben Bartch, meanwhile, offers valuable experience. Sometimes simply having a veteran between 2 talented offensive linemen brings stability to an offensive line. A player who understands positioning, communication, and assignment consistency can quietly become extremely valuable, even if he isn't the most physically gifted athlete on the field. Miles Frazier also remains in the conversation, although there haven't been many recent public comments highlighting his progress. That's something worth paying attention to. When coaches consistently mention certain players throughout the offseason but rarely discuss another competitor, fans naturally begin wondering where that player currently stands in the evaluation process. Then there is another intriguing name that continues to generate curiosity. Giovanni Manu. The Lions are reportedly giving Manu an opportunity to compete at guard entering what becomes a very important third season. His combination of size and athleticism makes that transition particularly interesting. There have been successful NFL players who entered the league as offensive tackles before eventually finding their best position inside at guard. Sometimes that move unlocks a player's potential because it allows them to play more aggressively while taking advantage of their physical traits. Just imagine the sheer size that offensive line could have if Manu eventually earned significant playing time alongside Detroit's established talent. That possibility alone makes him one of the more interesting developmental players to watch throughout camp. Defensively, the linebacker room may be one of the deepest groups on the roster, but that doesn't mean every role has already been decided. Jack Campbell has firmly established himself as one of the leaders of this defense, while Derek Barnes has continued showing steady improvement throughout his career. Year after year, Barnes has gradually become a better player. Maybe fans hoped for an even bigger leap, but consistent development is still valuable, especially in a linebacker room that relies heavily on communication and reliability. That naturally shifts attention toward Malcolm Rodriguez. Rodriguez unfortunately disappeared from the conversation after suffering an ACL injury, and because he wasn't available, many fans almost forgot how effective he had been before getting hurt. Going back and studying his earlier performances reminds you that he consistently found the football, tackled well, and brought tremendous energy whenever he stepped onto the field. The biggest question now isn't whether Malcolm Rodriguez can eventually return to form. Modern ACL recoveries have shown that players often do come back successfully. The challenge is timing. Full recovery frequently takes longer than many people realize, even after a player has technically been cleared to return. Assuming his recovery continues progressing well, Rodriguez enters camp with a legitimate opportunity to reclaim an important role, but he won't have that opportunity handed to him. Jimmy Rolder is another linebacker generating legitimate